So many HR professionals find themselves leading smaller and entrepreneurial businesses. And of course, there's a key role to be played in terms of creating governance and structure, but at the same time, not losing the entrepreneurial spirit that is so vital to exactly that kind of an enterprise. We are most privileged to have with us two leading executives this afternoon who will share their thoughts on how one best does that. So a warm welcome to Carel Nolte, who's the CMO of Purple Group, and to Nicola Tager, who's the head of careers at Investec. My goodness.
Okay.
Later the second day. Carel, how do you see entrepreneurship and the benefit that brings in an organization, and specifically for our HR professionals out there in their role?
So I think entrepreneurship allows people to fail. And I think we often are scared to fail, thinks everything needs to be perfect. But working in a startup, an entrepreneurial business, you need to fail, and you need to fail often, and you need to be comfortable with failure. So just in your recruitment practices is to get people that don't need to always know exactly what the next milestone is going to be. So yeah, failure for me, and encouraging failure, allowing failure, celebrating failure, I think is a big part that you need to encourage.
That's great, because I mean that's the only way you learn. And so how do you keep the balance between good entrepreneurship and free flow, but at the same time good governance and good structure, and some of the basics that you just need for order and discipline within an organization?
I think I'm going to expand a little bit to your point, but I think it's about the characteristics in the people that you do hire into the organization. And I think an entrepreneurial business needs to focus on bringing people in that have just got common sense. It's not a difficult thing to find in terms of maturity, in terms of people. People generally try and make decisions based on common sense. We generally don't try and put ourselves or organizations at risk. And I think it's to focus on organizations that are built and driven by culture and not policy. I think if you try to be a policy-driven organization, you've got a problem, because it will be the first thing that will kill a freedom to operate, an autonomy, and an opportunity for people to really bring themselves to the organization, which is ultimately what you're trying to achieve with an entrepreneurial culture or organization. I mean, I obviously operate in quite a large corporate, so not a small entrepreneurial business, but the fundamentals are still the same in terms of the values in which we want people to bring to the organization and the context in which we give them to try and thrive and outperform.
And purpose is absolutely at the heart of that.
100%. You build a culture to support a business strategy. You build a purpose to give people direction.
And I think despite the fact that you're at a big corporate, it's a very entrepreneurial firm. It started an entrepreneurial spirit, and you've managed to maintain that. And I think your point is exactly right. It's because you focus less on policy, which can change, has to change, so legislation and what have you, but far more on the culture and strengthening that. So I think people often think that entrepreneurial spirit is linked to size. So it's small. It's not. And I think Investec is a perfect example of a big business that maintains that entrepreneurial spirit.
And on culture, Carel, how do you see the link between culture and marketing?
So for me, it's two sides of the same coin. It's all about people. And it's as cliched and as simplistic as that. Culture is people, HR is people, brand is people. This represents Investec, the person right here. You know everything about the business right there. So people who try and separate your brand and your HR, I think it's completely silly. I've been delighted to bump into some previous colleagues of mine from various businesses, and it's who you hire, who you support, who you promote, who you put in leadership positions. It's as simple as that, I'm afraid. There's nothing more rocket science, I think.
And I'm going to agree with that, if I may. Just to say that I think your culture is your internal adaptation of exactly the same principles of your brand. Your brand's just the external adaptation of that culture. So I think they are directly linked.
And people can see through it easily, internally and externally. If you present your company as innovative, but you're actually not. If you present your company as one that's open to failure, but you're actually not, people see through that very quickly. Your employees and externally. So it's very hard to bullshit people about that kind of stuff.
But Carel, I mean, you raise a very good point around the entrepreneurial spirit that doesn't only have to be linked to a small organization, but if you look at how Investec has done that really successfully.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Nicola, if you've got some tips, some ideas for the audience out there on how does one retain that entrepreneurial spirit within a much larger organization, which I'm sure does pose its challenges.
No, absolutely. I think it's to what I said in the beginning. Investec's always been a culture-led organization versus a structure or policy-led organization. It does mean that leadership plays a fundamental role in creating this context that we hold so dear. Without our culture, we say we don't have a value proposition that is anything different to our competitors. So we often speak at Investec around the fact that we're not necessarily the cheapest. We're not always the most innovative, but what we are is have an ability to deal with clients in terms of their solutions and their relationships incredibly quickly. So how do you do that? You get people that think of the business as their own. So it is fundamentally linked, again, to your specific CVP that you are offering your clients. But as I say, it takes a lot of work from a leadership perspective. It takes maturity in the way that leaders do take up their role, because leadership holds the context and manages the culture. So lots of work around leadership is the main and the key secret, I think.
And I think the leadership sets the tone for that sense of ownership that you want ingrained in every single employee. And I suppose then, Carel, if you look at the converse of keeping an entrepreneurial spirit in a large corporate, how do you prevent an entrepreneurial startup from becoming too corporate? Because I suppose you run that risk too.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a lot of good in corporates. I also think people shouldn't put these at opposite ends of the spectrum, because there's a lot of good that comes from a corporate. And I'm going to steal a line from my fellow panelist here, because I think it was a good one. It's common sense. Again, we don't have to complicate matters. Generally people want to do their best. Generally people want to contribute. And as leadership, I think the value that you can bring, and as HR practitioners, is to support, challenge, guide, influence people, not do, not tell, not shout. It's a lot. I use those words a lot: guide, challenge, influence, support. But I like that dose of common sense helps as well.
I like that very much too.
And if I may add, I think to bring it back to HR, which obviously this conference is focused on, I think you've got to look at all of the fundamentals of HR. One being the structure of the organization, 2 being the rem and reward philosophy that you drive, 3 being your performance management philosophy, etc. And I think you've got to use those things to consistently underpin and support this entrepreneurial ability within your organization. If I just take maybe structure as an example, if you put in an incredibly vertical hierarchy in an organization who are trying to hold this entrepreneurial spirit, you will kill it quite quickly. Because if you've got this very vertical hierarchy, the person at the bottom end is going to look up and say, I've got absolutely no influence. Can I take a risk without getting permission from the next layer, the next layer, the next layer? So I think you can have a hierarchy, but I think it's got to be different. It's got to be based on relationships. It's got to be based on influence, and it's got to be based on delivery. So you can have people that have some element of power, but I don't think it can be based on status or hierarchy. So one thing that I have found in organizations that kills an entrepreneurial culture quite quickly. And that's just an example of how you get your HR practices to support the culture that you're trying to drive.
Yeah, and just tying in with that, because I think it's well put, is also a couple of sayings that I like, is take what you do very seriously, but don't take yourself seriously.
I like that.
And in terms of the power dynamics, if you've got this very vertical structure, often there are people with more power here, not
Absolutely.
actually, and that causes problems if it is so vertical. So I think you're absolutely right. But don't take yourself too seriously. Focus on what's important. Acknowledge your own faults. Laugh at yourself often. Business should be fun. Business shouldn't be this dreary, terrible thing we go to just to make money. It should be fun. We should be contributing. We should be growing. Entrepreneurial firms, large or small, we're building. And I think we mustn't forget that. Which is why I love this environment here. I love the fact that we can sit here, have a conversation, get questions from you guys, working together. It's not, have fun.
You need that daily excitement to want to go somewhere and ever keen to learn and to understand better. I wanted to find out, Nicola, you spoke about the importance of a voice of the people. Have you got some good mechanisms or things that have worked really well. And Carel, you're welcome to add to that, in terms of giving people at all levels an appropriate voice, also to foster that sense of ownership.
So I think it is, again, about some very sensible practices like very open door policies. Can people approach anyone in your organization? Can they not only approach them, but can they challenge them? Can they challenge them from anything based on strategy to basic implementation? Can they go there with an opinion? And can they justify the opinion that they're holding? And then I want to say, when there is debate, what type of process do you help hold or facilitate? So where there are differing or conflicting ideas, do you close one down immediately, or do you allow your organization to open up a very big dialogue that may take a lot more time? I'm saying, I think if you practice it once or you practice it twice, it becomes a muscle that the organization then builds. This ability to listen to differing opinions, etc. We all know that the power is going to be in diversity of thought.
Absolutely.
And so I'm saying, bringing through these opinions, which an entrepreneurial characteristic would obviously hold, but allowing these opinions to keep merging in the organization, and then not only allowing them to emerge, but doing something with them, I suppose, is the second key aspect.
Yeah, and maybe just to extend on that, I think in entrepreneurial setups, you often have really strong and dominant personalities. And so they'll say that they have an open door policy and they'll genuinely mean it.
Correct.
But a lot of people will find it very difficult to walk through the open door. So, extending on that, it is create those opportunities for diversity. So don't just say I've got an open door policy. Find people that make you uncomfortable as a leader, that challenge you, that frustrate you, but get diversity of thought. Absolutely. We've got a wealth, particularly in our country, not just diversity in terms of race, gender, obviously, but so many other aspects. And it's a big strength, I believe, of our entrepreneurial spirit, is the diversity. So we must use it.
Definitely. So life is not always perfect. There are some challenges that one has. I thought it would be interesting to find out what are some of the challenges you've had and how you've overcome them.
So short-term thinking is one that I think is a big problem. People want return and delivery immediately. People want career advancement yesterday. So short-term thinking, I think, is a problem. And I think it's a worldwide problem. It's a lot of what we're seeing all over the place at the moment. Is people want the here and now. So I think it's creating space for longer conversations, for broader thought, for thinking how we want a place to be long after we've gone. So short-term thinking, I think, is a challenge. And then the point we've just spoken about it, the lack of diversity. I think we, in South Africa, particularly withdrawing into a lager culture, staying close to people that are similar to us, and we need to really make sure we go to places, physical and in our own minds, that's diverse, that challenges what we do and think. And I think we're not doing that particularly well at the moment.
I would agree, and I would expand upon that to say that if you take technology and how it's disrupting organizations, and then you take the new generations that are coming into our workforce, they really are forcing us to think quickly and adapt relatively quickly in the way that we do things. And I'm saying, unless we move with that adaptation, we are going to be relatively stale, and we're going to find ourselves in hot water. So I think it is moving with the changing times that is the challenge for people right now. And I agree. And it is still not with short-term thinking. It is with a very long-term view in terms of what's the future of the world of work going to look like and how are we adapting to go with it.
And maybe just on the diversity, I think part of what was also lacking is I see people don't read a lot, gross generalization, but reading. I think sitting down and engaging for an extended period of time, even 45 minutes, and God, that's a very long time. So, spending quality time with yourself and your thoughts, reading, watching different things, engaging with people, is something we need to do more of, and we don't, because we use as an excuse that we're too busy and the next thing and the next thing.
But we spent a lot of time staring at a screen. I think I saw that there was it in Cape Town where there's a significant investment in the libraries, and I was really encouraged to hear that, because I think exactly along your line of thought, there's so much that one could learn and gain, and teaching your children from a young age to visit the library, to have a thirst for knowledge, to understand that there's all sorts of different things that you can learn about. It's not just single dimension. It's not just how to be an entrepreneur or, whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think in diversity of thought and diversity of future thinking, that's absolutely critical if you look at where the future's going. How do you see what HR might look like in the future? What do you think will be the role of HR in the future? How do you think that's going to change from where it is today?
So I think the role of HR has already started to adapt. I think it's become incredibly strategic in organizations and the value is known. And I think it's around guiding and supporting leadership far more than it's ever been versus structuring policy or ensuring organizations adhere to policy. It very much is this relationship, this strategic relationship with the business leaders. And why? It's because I think HR is focused on performance and business performance at that. So I think there's very little difference between, for example, management consulting and HR practice these days. I think everything is intertwined. And I think like a financial director is looking at the strategy from a finance perspective and say how we're achieving it, I think HR is really focused on performance consulting and performance consulting towards the business achieving strategy. That is why we create really good recruitment practices, really good REM philosophies, etc. I think it is to fundamentally and have quite a direct support to business achieving what it's set out to do so. And if we can't find that direct link, I worry then around what we are trying to achieve outside of that. So I think it is leaning into supporting leadership, supporting strategy, and getting high performance out of businesses.
Yeah, I think your strategy and your people practices it's critical that they are appropriately aligned. I wanted to ask you, Carel, on entrepreneurship and a smaller entrepreneurial organization, Nicola, you mentioned common sense. What are some of the other traits that you would look for in people that you bring into the organization? So I'd be keen to hear your perspective and then yours too,
Sure.
Nicola.
Sure. So grit, it's hard. So you need to be able to stay the course and understand that things aren't plain sailing. The ability to be comfortable with being multi-skilled. So you can't. That's not your role. You've got many roles, and it will change tomorrow. So if you thought it was this, it's something different tomorrow. So the ability to be comfortable with that constant change and differing requirements, I think, is important. What else? I think people who are self-starters, so linking to the role of HR, a lot of what was traditionally played by HR practitioners in a company, individuals themselves are doing, whether it's the structuring of their benefits or the like. Individuals are doing that themselves, so you've got to be au fait with that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think those would be some of the ones.
Sure, and I'll expand. I think those are absolutely them. I think we spoke about risk. I believe they are people that would have calculated risk. And I'm looking for someone to come into our environment and having a look for entrepreneurial characteristics. I don't want just a risk taker. I want a person that can be calculated in the risk they're going to take. I believe the same thing on the self-starter. I think it's a person that's got strong self-belief, because you're going to have to work quite autonomously in an organization that's got quite a robust entrepreneurial culture. So have you got enough self-belief to give yourself some level of direction? It doesn't mean that you can't ask for help. A person with strong self-belief actually will ask for help far more than a person that doesn't. But I think the self-belief will help drive people. I think also in a person that is able to adapt relatively quickly. I think the world requires us all to adapt, but specifically in this type of a culture, you're going to need to adapt and adapt fast. The multitasking I love, moving away from a highly technical job spec to giving people a broad understanding of what they've got to achieve, and then allowing them the freedom to take up their role in which they believe is going to be the best possible way for them to do it. And my last point would be like a true entrepreneur, a person that can leverage relationships. Yeah. Relationships and networks for an entrepreneur are absolutely key. And I think it's the same thing in an organization that would drive this type of space, is have you got an ability to engage relationships, and not for the sake of becoming friends with all people that you're going to work with, but an ability to get exposure to work, an ability to get access to go and deliver something well, an ability to connect people to deliver a massive project on behalf of the organization. So I think that relational ability is something that you've got to look out for.
And not to wait, because I fully agree with that, not to wait until you need that network or need that relationship, but to do it genuinely and naturally as part of your culture, as your own personal culture. I think you're completely right. And externally, outside the organization as well. So not thinking that I only need to network with people in investment, if you work in investment or banking, but broad networking, which is why I think events like this are so useful. So now spend 2 seconds, because I think the point that Nicola made is an important one and often overlooked, that if you're an entrepreneur and you're confident, it doesn't mean that you don't ask for help. It doesn't mean that you're perfect at everything. And I think it's exactly as you say, it's recognizing where you are not strong and where you need help. And knowing when and how to ask for that is vital.
And also to the other point that you made is interact with people who are not the same as you. Your best learnings come from spending time with people who are very different to what you are.
And then maybe one other thing we can chat a little bit about is also lifestyle business or the work-life balance. Is there such a thing? What is that? I think from being an entrepreneur, it's very easy to get sucked into not having perspective on life. And I think it's quite important that you have people that know what their own balance is. Is it going to the gym for an hour a day? Is it cooking? What is that? Because personally, I don't think that there's a work-life balance that's 50-50. Life is what it is, but how do you keep perspective on that? And I'd be quite interested how I mean, you personally and guys do that, because it's such a high-performance environment. Do you get time and opportunity to balance?
Sure. I don't know if I have the answer. I'm hoping someone in the audience can help us along this one. But all I can say is the way that I do it personally, because I've never been able to find the word integration or the word balance, etc. For me, I manage my life in chunks. Yeah. And I know it doesn't sound very sophisticated in the words that I use, but it's truly that. You know, sometimes work requires far more of me, and that's where my dedication and commitment is. And then at other times, maybe my family requires more of me, and I'll chunk to give my family my most effort, my most, amount of time, etc. So that's my way of making it work, but I don't think there's any one solution. So I'm hoping other people are going to give us a little bit of insight from their own perspective, but mine is just managing my life in chunks.
Well, I love that though, because also what we said earlier, it's not sophisticated explanation. I love that. It is actually chunk. It's a very practical, great way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
Thanks.
So on that high note, any questions from the audience?
Or advice.
Or advice, or comments, you're most welcome. Show of hands, there we go. And then this next one there.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gents. I was a bit, not necessarily confused, but something that caught my ear is the fact that you spoke so much about being comfortable in failing. Like as an entrepreneur, you need to be comfortable with failing. So I just wanna get your opinion on saying that in interviews we expected to sit there and paint ourselves as this highly successful people and hide our failures and never really talk about them. So how are we supposed to balance that? How are we supposed to talk about that and then make something good out of it?
Great, thanks. I think it's a great question, and I'm sure Nicola will also have thoughts. So for me, when you're at an interview process, it's entry to the game. You've got the qualifications, you've got everything else. So I very much want people to talk about their failures, what they're not good at, how they handle it when they fail. So that is what I explore. Somebody who pretends that they're perfect that's false, because none of us are. So somebody who's got to be able to talk about that the dog bit them this morning, or that their wife is shouting at them, or that they can't pay their bills at the end of the month, because that's reality, that's life. And in a work environment where we are working so closely together in this entrepreneurial environment, there can't be room for pretense. So I think it's old school to expect people to present themselves as perfect. A qualifier on failure is you've got to fail fast and you've got to learn from your failure. If you take a long time and you don't learn from your failure, there's a bit of a problem. But fail fast, fail often, fail forward, move quickly. So I'm pleased that you asked the question, because I'm at pains to make the point that failure is good. Without failure, there's no innovation.
No, I agree. And I worry about people that can't speak to a time in their life where they have failed, or B, you know, when you speak to someone and you say, speak about your attributes, and they're all incredibly positive. I worry about a person's level of self-awareness, I really do. And my favorite example, which I have to always speak to, is the fact that when I push someone to say, you know, it's okay, we've all got a balance sheet. We've all got a balance sheet. And in my mind, a lot of the things that you're working on are just the shadows of the fundamental strengths that you hold.
Exactly.
And I worry if a person can't identify that. And when I push them to say, we've all got this balance sheet, please feel free to explain to me, what are the things that you're working on? And when they sit there and they go, yeah, my issue is probably perfection. I want to puke, and I want to say, like, no, surely not. And I agree with the point. The point is not necessarily the failure or the development area, but it is around what that person's doing about it. So I'm less concerned about the actual aspect, but more concerned around how the person's navigating it or learning or dealing with it.
Yeah.
I think it's much more about being authentic and what your true strengths are. And none of us have never made a mistake. We've all made lots of mistakes. In fact, the ones that have made the most mistakes are probably the most successful. Not so. So I think it really is about being authentic and focusing on your strengths.
Okay, thanks. I'm Donation from the Competition Commission. One of the things about being an entrepreneur is to be able to look at the short term, medium term, and long term. And in other disciplines, it's always easy because there's a lot of insight. And Carel will agree with me that in marketing or sales, there's a lot of insight that one can use to plan and project for the future. But in HR, it's always difficult, you know, to sort of like swift which type of insight to look for to plan for the short term, medium term, and future. So my question to Nicola, what sort of insight do you normally look for when you plan as an HR person?
That's a tough question. And anyone else, please also feel free to add. I want to see other hands and ideas versus just mine. But I think there is power in data. And as HR professionals, we haven't been great historically on data. And it's a bugbear of mine. I mean, I'm not a data person, so you must understand, for me to sit here and have to say it as an HR professional is a tough thing to swallow. But I don't believe we've been great in terms of analytics of data and the intelligence that can come out of data. So I do want to say, and that's maybe more of a historic view and showing you a direction or trajectory. Number two, I want to say, I think it's about educating ourselves continuously and looking at organizations outside of our own. You know, we can tend to start to nasal gave as to, you know, what should Investec be doing better? What should Investec be thinking about? And my whole theory is there must be organizations out there, both internationally and in Africa, that we can learn from. And so my second point is research. You know, have we become a profession that is really robust in terms of research? And when I speak to research, it doesn't mean that we have to go and read a Harvard Business Review, but it does mean that we should be listening to podcasts and things around Netflix and organizations that are doing things incredibly differently to ours. And I'm sorry, I don't have any more of a sophisticated answer versus those two things. Just to say it is about a retrospective view, which I think data can give you, but then it is about a futuristic view. And if you can't find the futuristic direction amongst what you're working with, go and do research around other organizations and other professionals. And maybe the last point, that I will make, is around networks and the power of networks. You know, if you and I had lunch for an hour and a half together and fundamentally had to speak about what we were both working through, I bet you a couple of the points would be quite similar, but would come with very different insights and input. And I think we've got to create this profession to become far more networked in a way that we can engage each other's ideas versus compete on them.
So
Nick,
I
I just think that's a very real, realistic, and authentic answer.
So I wanted to tag on to what Nicola said in two ways. One is, and we don't know each other well at all, is the way that Nicola answers the question with lack of arrogance, I think is also an important characteristic of what we do. It's far more engaging to listen to somebody, this is my viewpoint, but what about this? And I think it's our language and how we talk. What about perhaps, what do you think? And to be more conscious when we talk, which I think is very important. And then whilst I'm on you, Nicola, I think I would suggest that something that we spoke about earlier could also help. is in a business, it's not HR versus the leadership of the business. It's also knowing what your business is about. And I've often found that HR and marketing people focus on HR and marketing, not the fact that they work at the Competition Commission or at a bank or in insurance. So when I looked after HR and insurance company, I did insurance exams. I networked in insurance world to better help me be an HR practitioner. And I think that's something that you guys, and you do particularly well as well. It's not HR versus this business.
I think it's absolutely a very integrated exercise. More questions?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pumlani from Onico Group. This is a question I'd like to direct to you, Nicola, as Head of Careers at Investec, but it's more open to the entire community of HR professionals. So us as emerging HR professionals, you find that we finish varsity and we get into a company through a graduate program or an internship. And you either be there for 24 months or 18 months or 12 months. It might happen that you are not absorbed by the company for whatever reason, and then you find yourself with the right skill to either be a junior HR consultant or an officer. However, when you try to get into the market, it requires 5 years experience or 3 years experience. So you find yourself stuck now, because when you try to go back and do another graduate program in another company that offers another type of business, they don't want to take you because they say we're looking for fresh graduates without future experience. So how do we then, as the emerging professionals, move forward, or what do we do in that space of time? And also, how do you, as professionals who are already in the industry, sort of find a conversation amongst yourself where you say it's okay to take a candidate that is already in possession of 40% of what I want and groom them? Let it not be about furthering the objectives of the business only. Do not want somebody who's just going to bake a pie and have it ready for you to eat it the next minute. Be able to also equip and impart. Can we just have that discussion? Thank you.
Yeah, hey, Nicola, you had to put me on the spot. I think it's a very tricky question in the sense that different businesses need different things at different times. And I think if you look at some of the conversations that we had yesterday, one of the things that we touched on was we sometimes need to find a mentor and a sponsor that can actually assist you to open that door. Because at face value, if you come to me and you say to me, I'm looking for an opportunity, but I've got 40%. The business sometimes requires me to go find somebody with 120%. So it's sometimes very important that you as an HR professional, you actually try and find somebody that's going to help add that other extra 20% that I didn't know about, because I don't know you enough to be able to take a risk on you. So the catch-22 comes in, where's the company at, and how many people are willing to actually take what doesn't yet exist? And who can vouch for you based on what you think you can provide? Because if nobody can vouch for you, it becomes very difficult for me to take it at face value to say, you have the right attitude and you'll be able to do this. But that's why I said to you guys, I think yesterday, to say the mentorship and that sponsor is one of the key things, because they get you to start speaking to the right people that will at least listen to you, and those people will normally give you a chance once they've heard what you had to say. That's just my 2 cents.
And I'm going to add on that. I think that's correct in terms of utilizing your own network, to the point of networks earlier, to find yourself an in. But I want to say that I think specifically in the beginning of your career, what's more important to me would be not necessarily the role that you're stepping into. So you spoke around an HR generalist or HR consultant. I want to say I'd be less fixated on the role that I was getting within the organization versus the organization itself. So I would want to say choose an organization that you believe could give you the growth, the exposure, and potentially the career. Well, I know people are not speaking about career paths anymore, but speaking about learning paths. And I think that is the fundamental, is get into an organization that's going to allow you to learn, specifically in the beginning of your career. So my feedback to you would be, get any role in an organization that you think is going to connect with you personally, and then grow within the organization. So lots of the people in our world that have come into HR, funnily enough, haven't even come through a specific route in terms of HR. You know, they took in another business role, to your point earlier, and learned about the business. And then we understood that they had a passion and they had studied towards this profession. And then it was seamless for us to bring them into our team or space, etc. So I want to say choose the right organization that's going to launch your career. And secondly, I wouldn't worry too much on the entry point of that career. But that's a personal view. Maybe others, Carel or others, would also love to give more insight.
No, I agree. Both those comments were good. Sorry, before Lorette asks the question, she's on the session after this, and it's brilliant, so don't miss it. Now make
Thanks,
the question
Carel.
good.
Thanks. It's all about pressure. Hi, everyone. I wanted to ask the both of you, because listening to you, I know one of the things that matters also is your instinct. I would like you to please tell us a little bit more about how you followed your instinct and how it's guided you in the decisions that you've made.
Yeah, good question. So I'll go. Instinct gut, I think, is important, and I go with that far more than anything else. And I do it with consciousness of my own biases towards the person that I'm engaging with. I do it with consciousness that I might be wrong, but I think it's a good thing to follow your instinct, and it ties a bit to that Malcolm Gladwell book in terms of knowing a lot, that you can make a judgment in an instant. So I think if you read a lot and you've engaged with a lot of people, that you can go with your gut. You know what's right with an organization. And it doesn't mean that the person's bad. I often use the example, if people aren't right, they must be successful elsewhere. Most people are good. The organization we've got to be honest, direct, and move on and be successful elsewhere. So yeah, my answer would be I love going with my gut, my instinct. I think it's very important. And it served me well. I've appointed people in roles that don't have the right qualification, and both of us have a shared background in insurance. And in an HR world, long story short, I once appointed a person who was an anthropologist, and he was newly qualified, and the CEO of the insurance company was horrified. And fast forward a few years, and the CEO appointed this anthropologist to head up this insurance company, will remain nameless, but one of the top 2 in the country, to head up their international operation. And I said, well, how did you manage that? He's an anthropologist. So it's going with your gut, I think, is often right.
So I want to say absolutely, going with your gut is key. Sometimes when I can't follow my own gut, I go to the collective wisdom of teams. So I quite like to go into a space where the team decides on certain things. So that subjective decision making by yourself, you can often get tripped up, to Carel's point, around biases, around where you are at that precise moment, around what's going on in your life. And what I really do appreciate is the value in the collective wisdom. So if you go into teams and make a decision, so take one of your decisions on recruitment. For me to make a decision on recruitment, I suppose, could have some value or power, but for me what would be far more important is a collective view and a collective opinion on the decision that we're making. So I love the gut and the intuition of collectives, and I think if you can find ways to put teams to deliver great decision making, I think it's far more powerful than just the individual intuition that each of us would hold.
And it talks to the diversity that we spoke about earlier, because I would agree with that. So a team that's different levels in the organization, different ages, I think would be very useful.
That's a very good question, and some very good comments made, because I think that the other side of it is also true. Do not override your gut. I think all of us know of situations where we've gotten ourselves into a ridiculous amount of trouble because you override your gut. Do not override your gut, and I love your suggestion around work with a collective. You know, there's no one person who can come up with as good an answer as a group of people. Right, final question.
Okay, the last one. I was the first one and I'm the last one. I think I haven't introduced myself. I'm Marupeng and I'm from Orica, Africa. My question is directed to Nicola. You spoke a lot about culture. I know Investec is very big on culture, and I've been following it very, very closely. And I've realized that most people would stay at Investec and then leave Investec for the guys next door to you guys, and then come back from there and then come back to Investec after some time. And you spoke about culture, you spoke about trying to move away from policies and procedures and stuff like that, and moving away from the vertical structures. So what would you say is the reason that these people keep moving from you guys to next door and then coming from next door to you guys? And I know someone is in this room and he's done that quite a lot.
There are a few of them actually, but I I think we've got a philosophy of home growing talent. So we love to bring young people into the organization. So if you look at our average age in comparison to other financial services organizations, we're probably a lot younger. With that said, I think we build people incredibly quickly, and then they get to that stage in their career, 5, 6, 7 years into their career, and they think, let me go and experience something that's different to the world that they would fundamentally know at that specific stage. And because we're a flat structured organization, for a youngster to have to swallow that there's not this linear growth path at that stage in their career could be confusing or frustrating for them. So that's the stage when we generally would lose someone to the next door neighbor. The next door neighbor, an amazing organization as well in itself. But yes, people would go and experience another organization, and I think the thing that they fundamentally would miss the most, because there could be lots of similarities, but I think the one thing Investec people miss the most is the freedom to operate. So if you ask me one thing that would force me out of the organization, it is if someone came in and took away my freedom to operate. And that is true to the entrepreneurial culture and spirit, and Carel will speak about it, but I mean, that is fundamentally what makes us tick and makes us thrive and makes us want to outperform, is this freedom that I don't have someone micromanaging me or following up on me. They're trusting me. They believe that I'm hopefully capable in what I have to do. And that my intention would be the best for the organization at all times. But then it allows me to be creative, to be innovative, to try brand new things, to stretch myself, to stretch teams in which we're working with, to really out-achieve what we had been performing previously. And I think that's why people would then come back to our organization. When we do lose people and they remain outside of the organization is when they generally go and start their own businesses. And to Carel's point, it's also a South African context thing. We have this entrepreneurial blood in us a little bit. I've worked in other countries. And so one thing that I miss the most when I'm not working with South Africans is this ability to want to be entrepreneurial in what we do. So where we do lose people and they've been successful beyond us has truly been when they've started their own businesses and created something for themselves.
And then to celebrate that, because whilst it's sometimes uncomfortable, I'm always delighted when people leave an organization I'm involved in if it's a better role. Worst case scenario, they're going to talk positively about us. Best case scenario, they'll come back in a couple of years. So HR practitioners that try to keep people when they've got a better opportunity, I think are extremely short-sighted. Celebrate their success, encourage them, wish them well, including if they're going to a competitor. And we want and need competitors.